Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. I'm a psychologist working for a state correctional department, treating criminals to try and reduce their risk of reoffending. I have a male client who says that he is transgender and in a couple of months is undergoing surgery to transition. For now, he is happy to be referred to as a male, but after the surgery, I am assuming that will change. I am unsure what I will choose to do at that point. If I refuse to address him as female, I will likely break rapport with him and damage the therapeutic relationship. I will also surely face disciplinary action from my employer and be open to complaints that could risk deregistration as a psychologist and other legal action. If I refer to him as a female, I will be lying and lose self-respect. I considered requesting to no longer treat the client and transfer him to another psychologist, although that would also likely lead me to face disciplinary action at work and so on. Do you have any advice about how I should think about this problem to make a good decision? I received this question recently, actually, and I moved it up to the front of the queue, even though I'm not sure if this guy's a supporter, but it's an urgent question with serious consequences, so I wanted to prioritize it. Now, this is a different situation from dealing with a normal person on the street. You are dealing with somebody in a correctional department, which I assume just means prison. That's what they call it, right? Or jail? I don't know. In any case, there are differences about how you treat people you are literally locking up who have lost their freedom. There are differences between that and how you would treat normal people. I'm not sure if those differences are relevant here or how they would manifest, but that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, if this guy is actually crazy, which I think is the only possible legitimate reason for the state to have a psychologist involved, then again, that changes the context because you deal with crazy people differently than you deal with normal people, but I assume he's not crazy. You don't mention that. This is just the state trying to get volitionally bad people to stop being volitionally bad. Well, if there were no consequences, despite whatever he desires, I would not call him by his preferred pronoun if it contradicted reality. But in this case, you are clearly under duress. It's shocking to me and sad, not because you're stupid or anything, but just that people are so vulnerable because of their concern for morality, which is a virtue. They're so vulnerable to feeling guilty over things like this when you would have nothing to feel guilty about by calling him whatever he wants, an airplane, whatever. If you're under duress, you're working for the state. And even if you weren't, we live in such a controlled society, especially in medicine or psychology, any kind of health profession, that you just have to go along with what they force you to do. If you're risking deregistration as a psychologist or other legal action, you have no obligation to be a martyr and to do something that will hurt you to no benefit to yourself. You will be lying, but you will not lose self-respect. That is the Jordan Peterson view of lying, which is one of the worst things he tells people. That every time you compromise, no matter the context, so-called compromise, every time you do something that you wouldn't otherwise do if you weren't under duress, then you are losing a bit of your soul. No, you're not. Not morally speaking. Now, it does have consequences. Living under socialism forces you to think a certain way. It does damage you. It does damage your psychoepistemology. But it shouldn't affect your soul, your moral self-esteem. And that's an important difference. Ayn Rand talks about the slaves in America, black slaves, and she really loved the show Roots. And part of it was because of how the slaves kept their self-esteem, their self-respect. They knew morally they were right, even though as much force as could possibly be arrayed against them was being arrayed against them. So absolutely do not think of it as you are losing self-respect or a bit of your moral soul when you do something under duress. You are absolutely not. I mean, here's another example Ayn Rand said. Somebody puts a gun to her head and tells her to denounce objectivism. Now, Jordan Peterson would say, well, you're losing a bit of your soul if you do that. Ayn Rand's view was, no, totally. Do it. It doesn't mean anything. If you're doing it under duress, that's not you choosing. Morality only comes in when you have a choice. If somebody forces you to do something, that is no reflection on you. And in this case, you are forced to state these falsehoods in order to defend yourself. You're not trying to gain a value through deception. You're trying to defend a value that is rightly yours. And those are completely different things. So the only thing I would say is, don't do it if you think this destroys the actual integrity of what you're doing, if it just makes your job pointless. So there are things I would do that I wouldn't do in a free society, things I do that I wouldn't do in a free society, because I do them in self-defense, because they allow me to get what I want out of life. But I would never compromise the integrity of my philosophical work for practicality's sake. Because the philosophical work is the end in itself. What would I compromise that in favor of? The whole point is to do other things. Maybe I lie in self-defense in other ways so that I can do the work I want to do my way. But if I compromise that, what am I doing it for? I'm not doing it in service of anything. So this is why I tell people, no, it's fine to take money from the government or scholarships or anything you can get from the state or whatever. So long as you have something you are actually aiming for. It is not legitimate to take money from the government just to sit around all day. Because if you're going to do that, you may as well kill yourself. You're not doing anything. There's no point in living. So if this affects your ability to actually do your job essentially the way you want to do it, only then would I not do it. And then not because of any obligation to other people, but just because you are put in a situation where it is practically impossible to do what you want to do. Then I'd get a job where I wasn't punished for expressing self-evident facts of reality. So if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, renounce everything you believe in, that's totally fine. Do it. And then as soon as he puts the gun away and goes away, go back to what you were doing. Call the cops on him if you can safely. But if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, I'm going to hold this here for the rest of your life so that you have to do something other than what you want to do, well then in that case you can't say, okay, well I'll go along with it because I'm under duress. I mean, you could do that, but there's no point. You may as well try to do what you want and see if he'll go ahead and blow your head off because, I mean, that's your only option. Reality isn't going to lose that game of chicken. Reality is what it is. So doing what you don't want to do will make you unhappy. That is the fact. So your only chance there is that this guy won't actually pull the trigger. So in that case, there's no point in giving in order to get what you want because you're not giving in order to get what you want later. It's not like momentarily renouncing everything so that you can go back to doing what you're doing. So I only advocate quitting your job or doing anything like that if what you're being forced to do is actually destroying essentially the thing that makes you happy. But if you can put up with this and it doesn't make a big difference to your essential work, then who cares? Call him a woman. Integrity does not require martyrdom. That is the principle. Next, I have heard you argue for Firebrand objectivism by pointing to the success anti-rational Firebrands in changing the culture. I'm reading these verbatim, by the way. That has been my decision. So, it's no longer up to me to edit as I read. It's totally up to you, the questioner. Whatever you send in, I will read if I read it at all. So, if you're fine with tons of mistakes in your message, that's up to you. You can take as much time crafting it as you want. If you don't care, it's fine with me. I don't care. But I will read it as written. So, again, I have heard you argue for Firebrand objectivism by pointing to the success anti-rational firebrands in changing the culture. My take is that the effectiveness of the latter may be due to appeal to emotion, i.e. pity, guilt, etc., rather than reason. Now this question is confusing. Even though it's brief, I can barely understand what he's asking, so I'm going to take this step by step. I haven't finished the question yet, but okay. So when he says, my take is that the effectiveness of the latter may be due to emotion, i.e. pity, guilt, etc., rather than reason, by latter he means anti-rational firebrand, because he talks about firebrand objectivism and then anti-rational firebrand. So his take is that the success of anti-rational firebrands, SJWs, was who I was referencing. So his take is that the effectiveness of SJWs may be due to appeal to emotion rather than reason. Okay, there are 3 things wrong with this emotion section. First, do you really think you need to give me examples of what an emotion is? I know what emotions are. You don't have to give me examples, pity, guilt, etc. Would I really be competent to judge your question if I didn't know what examples of emotions were? Second, if you're trying to give me examples of specific emotions that anti-rational firebrands may be capitalizing on, maybe guilt, but pity, that's the first one you list, that's not what they're capitalizing on. So even if you're trying to give me that kind of thing, it's completely wrong. And third, you use IE instead of EG. When you're giving examples, it's EG, not IE. Anyway, rest of the question. If so, the only takeaway I see is a reminder of the power of being principled, i.e. non-compromising. Am I overlooking something? I have no idea because I don't know what this means. I really don't get the logic of this question. So let's sum this up. I advocate for firebrand objectivism, and I point out how SJWs have been successful using this tactic. His take is that SJWs maybe are successful because they appeal to emotion rather than reason. And the takeaway he gets from their success in appealing to emotion is that being principled is effective. I don't understand what that means. Are you saying that appeal to emotion is something that capitalizes on people's concern for principle? But you're clearly talking about emotion rather than reason. That's what you say, emotion rather than reason. So what I just don't understand here is you're saying that they're effective using this bad tactic, and that your takeaway is something good, specifically the power of being principled, and I don't know what that means. Where does principled come into this? How are you taking that from what they're doing? I actually don't understand this question, so I'm afraid I can't answer it. I could guess at its meaning. There are a few possibilities, but the only real correct answer here is like when you get a math problem and the answer is there is not sufficient information to solve this problem. This guy recently stopped supporting me on Patreon, possibly because of my criticism of ARI. That seems to be corroborated by the content of this question, if he's skeptical of my firebrand approach. But nonetheless, he did pay me, so I've done my absolute best to decipher what this question means, and I don't get it. So all I can say is that being a firebrand has nothing to do with appeal to emotion in the negative sense. It does appeal to emotion, but for valid reasons, because it is serious and passionate. So no, I don't think SJWs were successful because of an irrational appeal to emotion. I think they were successful because they took morality seriously, and people understand rationally on some level that morality is important. If you set reason against morality, it's not irrational to go with morality, even if you conceptualize morality as being the opposite of reason, because it's true that morality matters. That's what morality is. It's what you should do. So anybody who takes that side when they see a contradiction is not being irrational if he's honestly confused, even though he's, quote, anti-reason. Because why would you be concerned with reason if it had nothing to do with what you should do? So in that sense, being pro-reason would be irrational. So the principle is, SJWs were not successful only because they appealed to the badness in people. Now, they did do that. They did take advantage of the bad premises people have, but they also took advantage of the ineradicable trait of human beings that makes them rationally respond to consistency and morality. And that is why they were successful. It's for both of those reasons. Now, I'm not saying if ARI had had the right approach to intellectual activism, they would have been as successful as the SJWs or Jordan Peterson, but they would have been a lot more successful. It is actually impossible to be as successful as Jordan Peterson while telling the truth. Because Jordan Peterson and the SJWs and all of these people with bad ideas are cashing in on the bad ideas of the culture. It is simply impossible for an objectivist or somebody who believes the truth to do the same thing because we don't have anything to cash in on. We're trying to change the culture. They are just crystallizing what's already there and pushing it along. So you actually could not be as popular as Jordan Peterson, even if you were doing everything right. Still, you could do a lot better than ARI has done and than classical liberals and basically pro-freedom people have done. You could do a lot better. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.